West. I think, although many Westerners claim to be living in a Christian country, in my view, most Western nations are post-Christian in the sense that they are as Christian as a human skeleton used to be human. And this, I think, may be something to do with the founding of the American Republic and its First Amendment. I believe that the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of belief and freedom of speech for Americans, is based on Chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran. I know there is a White House Quran which belonged to Thomas Jefferson, who drafted the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, which subsequently became the First Amendment. And I think the reason why it was considered so important to the founding fathers of America to establish this principle was that religious persecution, particularly that of Christian on Christian religious persecution, continued from the old world into the new, from the novels and stories of Nathaniel Hawthorne, the practice of Christian on Christian persecution took place in America in the I think it was Virginia, wasn't it? And it was the Quakers and the Puritans actually fighting and killing each other. And so, and I think it all ended in the Salem witch trials, or, when everybody stirred themselves into such a state of hysteria and paranoia. In the 1870s, we may remember a German philosopher called Nietzsche, who announced that God is dead and we have killed him. The 1870s, of course, was a time of the culture war in Germany called the Kulturkampf, and it really was a culture war between the Catholic Church and the newly unified German nation, who were promoting the policies of liberalism, which presumably came from America. Presumably Germans were thinking, well, if Americans have their First Amendment, why can't we? We want our First Amendment too. Particularly in the light of the French Revolution, which established a French Republic, which rejected the idea of a monarchy and the idea of, I think it was called cuius regio eius religio, which I would translate as whoever is the monarch, his religion will be the religion of his subjects. And this was the rule in the old world. So really, Gentiles in Europe would not have any religious freedom at all. If they disagreed with the religion of the monarch, they would be, burnt at the stake. And this was a famously Christian practice, which they, of course, subjected Jews to. They forcibly converted Jews, and then not being sure if they were properly Christian, which meant properly believing Jesus to be the co-equal of God, they would subject them to the occasional Inquisition to make sure that they were properly eating pork and properly believing that Jesus is God and worshipping him as the co-equal of the supreme and eternal Abrahamic God who created the universe, as the Abrahamic God is believed by the Abrahamic faiths to have done. This seems to me to be idolatry, and bearing in mind the Christian narrative that Jesus was convicted and then crucified for blasphemy, it does seem to me that Christians have been worshipping a deceased prophet convicted and crucified for blasphemy, and whether they mean to or not, affirming his act of, or his declaration of blasphemy. The Muslim account in the Quran doesn't say that Jesus was a blasphemer, and in fact, we know that Muslims recognize Jesus as a prophet of God, and they even recognize the virgin birth. So we know there is some conflict in this matter, but what is agreed on is by Jews and Muslims, according to their scripture, is that Christianity has dubious, the Trinity, I should say, the Trinity has dubious origins, and we know that the doctrine of the Trinity was something that came as a result of the Council of Nicaea, when the Emperor Constantine, who had decided to use Christianity as the religion of his empire, he wasn't even Christian at the time, so he called the Council of Nicaea. He called the Christian bishops to Nicaea to agree on some kind of doctrine that he could use so that he can properly call Christianity his the religion of Rome. And prior to that, there was the problem of Gnosticism when Christians were basically saying anything they liked about Christianity, and nobody seemed to be sure, what a Christian was or what a Christian was supposed to believe in. Anyway, the bishops of Christianity came to the Council of Nicaea, but unfortunately for them, they couldn't even agree on the doctrine, because there were those who, followers and supporters of Bishop Arias, basically said, well, we can put our name to saying that Jesus was divine, but we're certainly not going to say that he is the co-equal of the Abrahamic God who created the universe. But as we know, the Trinitarians won the day, and there has been persecution by the Trinitarians, who are the most powerful churches in the world. They would be the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and the Orthodox Church, and they would persecute the Arian heretics, whose modern-day equivalents would be Jehovah's Witnesses. And that is presumably why Jehovah's Witnesses have always been considered a fringe minority. So this being the problem of Christianity, belief was eventually completely eroded. I mean, if they didn't believe in that Jesus was God, eventually they would deny that God even existed. And that was the fear of Nietzsche when he first said what he did about God is dead and we have killed him. I think it would have been more accurate of Nietzsche to have said the Trinity is dead and the American Republic have killed Christian belief in it. And so we now come to the 21st century, when I think there is some serious doubt as to what moral system currently operates in America and its allies, who still think of themselves as Christian nations, but who appear to be more liberal than Christian. And I think that the best way of making out this conundrum is to assume that liberalism replaced Christianity, unfortunately, because liberalism has no official handbook or scripture. It has really been a cushion that bears the imprint of the buttocks of the politician that most recently sat on it. So whatever liberal principles that are good, that we might agree on, and which I would count, I would list the liberal principles that I approve of as freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Well, freedom of speech has always been circumscribed by incitement to crime and obviously public order offences, as well as the laws of, defamation and confidentiality. But subject to that, we have free speech and freedom of worship. The other liberal principles I can think of would be freedom of contract, freedom of association, the right to property, and I think that's about it. If I haven't, there should be 5. I may have overcounted them, but these are the principles of liberalism that I think most people would agree are fair enough. But this has been eroded by so many laws that render freedom of contract, well, in doubt. We know about the bakers being forced to bake cake for those who want to celebrate gay marriage. We know about employment legislation that forbid acts of discrimination, which is thought crime. And also the idea of treating anyone accused of a crime as virtually guilty on the testimony of only one witness is something that is against Deuteronomy 19:15, if I remember correctly. So many of these biblical principles have been eroded over the decades. And I think this does put a lot of our liberties in the West in doubt, and nobody seems to have noticed, or perhaps they're too afraid to protest against it. But I think it is important that we consider the possibility that religious scripture actually guarantees our freedom more than so-called secular political ideologies of liberalism, when they have no official handbook and certainly no scripture, and nobody even now can agree on what liberal principles are. So if you go back to basics, I think we would find our liberties to be better guaranteed. And of course, some of us, I hope, will know that the Supreme Court of the American Supreme Court has a frieze containing the images of Moses and Hammurabi and Muhammad. So I think the founding fathers did intend for their exceptional and indispensable nation to embody the best laws of the best legal systems in existence, because this is what the Declaration of Independence actually assumes, that it is self-evident that man was created equal. Although the Declaration of Independence did not mention God, it is implied that God must have created it. God must have been the only, must have been the creator of these men who were created equal. I know the document was also intended to reject the very concept of monarchy. And the idea of equality is really about men being allowed to become leader of the nation. The American Republic, as its name implies, is about the rejection of monarchy, as was the French Republic. Now, what has this to do with the Noahide Laws? The problem, I think, for Christians would be the fact, I would argue, that Christianity is idolatry. Understandably, Jews and Muslims have been afraid of pointing this out to their Christian overlords. But if it is really the case now that the West is post-Christian, then there are probably no believing Christians in existence. There will be, of course, religious leaders like the Pope and the Archbishop of Canterbury and the priesthood of these different churches, but they would be required to confirm their belief in the Trinity in order to get into the priesthood, which obviously confers status on those who join and rise in it. But speaking as an agnostic, I feel bound to see things through, two different lenses: the lens of an atheist and also the lens of a theist who fully accepts the narrative of the Abrahamic God. So if it is true that all good and evil come from God, and that all suffering is punishment for sin, then the pandemic, which is global, must be punishment for sin. And if Jews and Gentiles are being punished, then we can easily ascribe this to the sin of idolatry, I would have thought, since there have been 3 global Christian empires and Jews and Muslims have not been able to challenge or protest against this global idolatry and blasphemy. Perhaps now would be, now is the best time to make this point, since we are all suffering, whether we are Jews or Gentiles. And I'm surprised that no religious leader has suggested that the pandemic could be a punishment for sin, and suggested that global repentance might be a way of ending the pandemic. We can only try. I thought it might, this is just my little idea, that idolatry would offend God if he exists, and obviously idolatry, all idolatry is blasphemy, in that, if you define blasphemy as anything that would offend God if he exists. And obviously it is possible to offend God other than through bowing before idols and worshipping them. We can offend God through speech, by saying such things as Jesus lives or Mary is the mother of God, without bowing before any idol. And this is something I invite Jews and Gentiles to consider. And that's really it. That's all I have to say on the matter. Thank you for your attention.
Wow, Claire, thank you so much. I just want to mention something, and then we're going to open it up to our viewers here, our esteemed viewers. But you mentioned about both Rabbi Sachs and Rabbi Menachem Schneerson. So I had the great privilege really to meet both. My wife and I were in Crown Heights, and we actually spent a Shabbos there, and we actually saw the Rebbe, and it was an incredible experience. I actually was very fortunate. That was about 33 years ago. And then also with Rabbi Sachs, when he came to Israel, I was very fortunate to meet with him on numerous times and to video his various talks. And I just want to mention something, and then we're going to open it up. You mentioned about today that maybe in the Orthodox or the 7 laws of Noah, it's not so much really spoken about, or actions are done, to promote. But in the Chabad, I heard an amazing story that in the north, there were Chabad, and they were handing out it's the Feast of Tabernacles of Sukkot, a lulav and an etrog. And one guy walked past, and they said, "You want to bench the lulav, and the etrog?" And he said, "I'm not Jewish." And the guy said, "It doesn't matter, let me give you a blessing. We're all one people." That guy happened to be a Muslim. And he said that encounter changed his life, because this Orthodox Jew looked at him as a person, and he embraced him. And he said, "We're all one people." And he became later a tremendous advocate for Israel. He was a cook, and he worked in a hotel, and he didn't really get on with Israelis. And he went back to his Arab village in the Galil. And later on, he decided that he has to be an advocate for the truth And today he's one of the main speakers that goes around many universities all over the world, explaining what the real situation is here in Israel. And it all happened from an encounter with a Chabad who looked at him as a fellow human being. And I think from the teachings of Chabad and the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I want to open up to our esteemed guests here. If Prof. Asher or Miriam, if you want to make any comments or ask any questions. Miriam?
Yeah, I want to say years and years ago, I was in Jerusalem there was a very small yeshiva class for women, and it kind of similar to your situation, Les, that you just mentioned. So we were being taught by a rabbi, and then a non-Jewish person walked in, and the rabbi said, "Close your books. We can't learn anymore because there's a Gentile here now." In front of the Gentile, the rabbi said, "We can't learn any more Torah because we have a Gentile here." And I didn't know much about that, years ago, but thinking about it, what the opposite effect is of what you just explained, Les. It was, and now it hurts me. It hurt me at the time, but it hurts me more now thinking about it. And I wanted to share also. Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
Can I just say something on this? That rabbi was exceptionally wrong because he embarrassed a fellow human being, and he should never have done that. And it was uncalled for, and exceptionally, you aren't allowed to embarrass somebody. Embarrassing somebody is one of the greatest sins. The Chofetz Chaim, he wrote the book on, you can't lashon hara or embarrassing somebody, but embarrassing somebody publicly is like one of the worst embarrassments you could ever dream of doing. But I'll just mention something. I actually spoke to somebody today. He wouldn't even mind me telling his name. His name's Don Lawrence. He came from Canada, a non-Jew, and he was accepted at Aisha Torah before he converted. And Aisha Torah welcomed him, and he came to our shul as a non-Jew, and he was accepted by the whole community. We've got a lot of converts here in Beit Vegan that come to our shul, and some do convert, some don't convert, but they're all very welcome. And the rabbis often given a talk, and no one's ever said, "Wow, somebody has to leave" or whatever. They welcome. They go to Shabbos tables. People give drushes. They give talks. So that rabbi was really, really wrong. It's unfortunate. It's terrible what happened there. But it's not the norm.
It really hurt me at the time. I was a lot younger. It really hurt me, but I didn't understand what I understand now, that was not a good situation. But it stuck in my mind. I was probably in my early 20s, maybe my late teens when that happened. But yeah, I vividly remember that.
I think that there's a school of thought that there's a rabbi, the late Rabbi Soloveitchik, who said that Jews shouldn't teach idolaters any Torah or any Hebrew, isn't that?
Not Hebrew. No, Hebrew you are allowed to. And if you look in the Talmud, a lot of the great rabbis in the Talmud are converts. A tremendous amount are converts. If you go through the whole of Jewish history, some of the greatest of the rabbis, Rabbi Akiva, comes from families of converts. Yeah. So Reish Lakish in the Gemara that's mentioned many, many times, he was a highwayman, he was a convert. So that's not really so true. The thing is that if you haven't converted, you aren't allowed to do all the laws of the Torah. So somebody who's in the process, or you should actually you aren't allowed to keep all the commandments if you haven't converted. But in our shul, both in South Africa, where we had the head of the Bet Din, Rav Kutzstein, and he's actually giving a Zoom tonight, which I'll have to leave early. But we had many converts come, and many non-Jews come to our shul, some who didn't want to convert, and they were friends. And he never once ever said, and he was head of the Bet Din in South Africa for 30 years, he never once ever said, people aren't welcome, or he never ever said, I can't give my talk to the whole community when he was giving it. The total opposite I've actually witnessed and I've been part of. And from that shul in Johannesburg, there are many converts and many people that say didn't convert, but remained very close to the Jewish people there in South Africa and very close friends.
But I suppose the question is the discussion on whether Christianity is idolatry and blasphemy, which I know everybody wants to avoid discussing, but you know, if America is in moral peril and the Western nations who are its allies also in moral peril, then isn't it the duty of Jews to warn and advise them?
So, may I say something in response to that?
Please go ahead, Miriam.
Okay, I would just like, it's a very, very, very deep discussion when Christians have based their whole life on this understanding that they have. It's a very, very deep discussion. I know so many sincere, beautiful Christians, this is the crux of their faith. And I know very many sincere, beautiful Christians that support Israel and pray for Israel. And basically, some have told me they will put their life on the line for Israel, that have this level of faith about how they see what we might call idolatry. I think that it's going to, unfolding will happen in God's time with the truth coming out. And one thing I'd like to point out is that Ari Abramowitz and Jeremy Gimpel, that are broadcasting from the Judean Hills every Sunday morning, are teaching, like probably 75% of their teachings every week are to non-Jewish people all around the world that are tuning in from different countries, from the Philippines to Iceland to Germany. These mainly Christian people tuning in to learn about Hebrew concepts of things and the roots of their faith, about the Torah portion, about latest news, all being broadcast in the Judean Hills. So Ari Abramowitz and Jeremy Gimpel have put themselves in a position to teach everywhere, because the scripture says, my house should be a house of prayer for all nations. And as we all unite and join together and study together, do you think truth will come forth?
Well, I think I should add something now when you're done, Miriam.
Yeah, I am done. Thank you for listening.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's a fundamental misperception about what the prohibition of idolatry means. Now, I'm sitting here in Abu Tur, Givat Hanania, where I do look over the Temple Mount, and right down the window there is the Valley of Slaughter, Gei Hinnom. Jeremiah talks about it by name, where children were sacrificed. As some of our sages explain, and there you come to fundamental difference between authentic Torah-based Israelite Jewish thinking and Christian thinking, which from Greece and Rome, concepts, abstractions, real idolatry is not simply having the wrong ideas. Of course, we have a concept of wrong and right ideas. Real idolatry, real idolaters, if you actually read the Tanakh, most people don't. Now, I don't really know much about the Talmud or the Zohar, Kabbalah. I know my Tanakh pretty well, and with the rabbinic commentaries. When one actually looks at the prophets screaming about idolatry, they're talking about the tribes of the time that engaged in theft, murder, rape, and child human sacrifice. Simply having the wrong ideas, where someone says, well, I go to the Methodist Church, but you're a Mormon, and I'm a Catholic. From our perspective, of course, ideas are important. But when the prophets talk about real idolatry, it's not because, well, you believe in the Trinity, or you believe in consubstantiation or transubstantiation, or the Son is co-equal with the Father, and all of these things. And of course, I shouldn't believe them. But real idolatry, meat and potatoes, is theft, murder, rape, and child human sacrifice. That was the problem the Israelites had with the nations of Canaan. Not because, well, you have a different strokes for different folks. They were all offered the choice of, you can accept the Noahide covenant and laws, and that we're coming in, and God gave this land to us, or you can leave, the Girgashites did, or you can fight, in which case we don't take any prisoners. But what was the problem with the people of Jericho and the 7 Canaanite nations? Wasn't that they went to the wrong church or the ashram, is they slaughtered children, usually their own. And the God of Israel, who chose Abraham, that was the issue between Nimrod and Abraham. Most people don't understand this, including Jews, don't understand what is the story with Isaac all about. and the sacrifice. And I read the commentaries and I realize when I'm reading them is the people who write them are not familiar with what was going on at the time. Abraham thought it was perfectly normal in his world, in the ancient world, and it hasn't changed much. There's still people who do that, very powerful people, and not just tribes in New Guinea, they do that too. When people ask me, say, what, you mean there are members of the ruling classes in different countries who engage in child sacrifice? Do they do that? My question is, why would you think they ever stopped? Now, let's not deal with how they come to believe they should do that or why. But this was the norm, not the exception in the ancient world. Human sacrifice of your enemies, of your slaves, of your firstborn. How was it with the Mayans and the Incas? You played lacrosse, the head of the winning team got his head cut off, I think. Human sacrifice, which was usually accompanied by theft, murder, rape, and when they got drunk and stoned, orgies too, to get them in a state to break down their resistance to acts people might find offensive and do that. That was the norm. And this is what the story of Isaac is all about, is God is saying, no, I'm not like those other deities. Yes, and this is another point I'd mention. In Genesis 1:1, God created the heavens and the earth. You could say God created the Elohim, the extraterrestrial powers, the heavens and the earth. God created or allowed for the creation of all the negative powers too.
Let's get on to the note.
And we have some degree of choice who will listen to. So these discussions of Christianity, yes, the concepts are, from our point of view, defective. You have the
I suppose amongst rabbis there is this discussion about whether Shituf is worse than Avodah Zarah or the other way around.
Yes, our sages do discuss whether it is, and it usually was the sages in Islamic land felt safe enough to say Shituf is an idolatrous concept, and the sages in the Christian world said, well, you have in the prophet Malachi in chapter 1, verse 10, God says, my name is great among the nations. It's repeated. But how could it be great among the nations? Well, because they may have had an assembly of gods, but they recognize a supreme God. He wasn't talking about people engaged in human sacrifice. This is the issue in the Tanakh.
Wasn't Jesus a victim of human sacrifice? Wasn't he a human sacrifice?
Assuming it actually happened, he was put to death by a court. Then the question is, which court? The
Sanhedrin, according to the Christian narrative.
Yes, Maimonides says that Jesus was put to death by the court, by the Sanhedrin, which I think was controlled by the Sadducees. No, being put to death by a court is not human sacrifice. The Noahide laws which specify death for theft, murder, and rape, that's not human sacrifice.
Well, Christians believe that Jesus died for their sins, so Jesus was
they
their
believe
human
that.
sacrifice.
You're right. This also
and they have a.
They certainly believe that. Not only they believe that, but in their churches,
they drink his blood and eat his flesh.
Yeah, with the mass.
I have to correct something. It's not that the Sanhedrin, that's not for sure, and the Rambam, I don't know if that's 100% sure. There's many different versions on who's responsible for. First of all, it was the Romans who were the ones who actually did the crucifixion. It wasn't part of the Sanhedrin.
That is true.
The Sanhedrin, no one mentioned in the Sanhedrin that they had a problem with Jesus. Never, ever. It's not mentioned at all.
I know where you're going with this, Les. Whatever it is, there's no excuse. Whether it was put to the death by the court, which court, the Sadducees, or I know Jews say, well, because they're afraid of pogroms. Whatever the answer is, who put Jesus to death or who handed him the Romans or not, there's no excuse for 19 centuries of mass murder, mass torture, and mass vilification of Jews in Christian Europe, culminating in the Holocaust, no matter what the answer to that is. Is it, well, okay, well, if it was, then it's okay. There's no excuse for that. No ands, ifs, or buts because of what was done or what wasn't done.
I agree, but the Ramban in the disputation in Barcelona in 1267, and some say it was 1264, but it doesn't matter. With Christiani,
Pablo Christiani.
What happened was that That's right. What happened there is that they discuss and they say that the who actually was Jesus, and there's different opinions, and there's different opinions of the time. So nowhere and I've got the Sanhedrin, the Gemara Sanhedrin, and I've learned Sanhedrin. Nowhere in the Talmud of Sanhedrin is there a trial of Jesus. That just didn't happen. The Sanhedrin were not responsible for having a trial with him. It doesn't even appear there. So that's why a lot of Christian theologians, they take the book of Sanhedrin and they try to learn it, but nowhere does it say there, that the Sanhedrin put Jesus to trial and to death at all. And there's even a question mark on in which period did Jesus live. It's
I know.
not so simple.
I know where you're going. I know where you're going with this, which is.
That's the problem. That the
I know where you're going with this, where you're going with this is because the reason Jews, whatever the answer is, and Maimonides says
we were blamed. Jews were blamed for his death, but the Romans were the ones that crucified, and crucifixion was never, ever, ever a Jewish punishment. It's a total Roman,
that's true,
pagan punishment.
But there's a fundamental point here. There's a fundamental point here which Jews and Christians should understand. Whatever the answer to that question is, there's no excuse for what the Roman Catholic, State Protestant, and Eastern Orthodox churches did to us, because 2,000 years ago something happened. All sorts of Jews got killed by all sorts of people, including each other in the Sicarii. That doesn't give you the right to say, well, since then, every Jew who ever lived, including us right now, if you do not believe our doctrines about Jesus, you crucify him again. The answer is, no way. You don't get out of responsibility for what you did to us. And I know why rabbis, I know that whole line and the trial of Jesus by Justice Chaim Cohen, because a Jew thinks, well, if I'll say that, then there'll be less of a pogrom. There's no excuse for your pogroms. Whatever was done 2,000 years ago by A to B, in no way excuses, again, that you talk about love, say, well, I'll give you an example. We discussed it last night in the program with Adam Berkowitz. In 1946, in Darmstadt, Germany, at the annual meeting of the Evangelische Kirche Deutschlands, the State Lutheran Church, in the very nation where those pastors, fathers and brothers and sons, many of whom were involved in atrocities against Jews and many others, ruled that we hope Jews will cease their ongoing crucifixion of Christ, for which was the Holocaust was the punishment, and accept him. That's not just wrong, it's satanic. You're dealing with radical existential evil. And I know where you're going, and I've heard that the answer to the question doesn't even matter, because I know where the thinking is, well, if I'll say that to you, we won't have a pogrom today because we're not all responsible, because they didn't do it, the Romans did it. Of course the Romans did it. And once they wrote the books, they need to shift the blame. And Pontius Pilate, who other sources say was a creep and a monster, is a little philosopher. What is truth? And I wash my hands. This is the classic Christian cop-out they pull till today. Well, they weren't real Christians. And then they say more than that, say, well, we didn't even do it. The Nazis were anti-Christian, but they weren't anti-Christian, anti-Judaism. And besides, it was really done by the Sabbatians and the Frankists. The Jews did it to themselves, and the Brown House was a yeshiva, and Hitler was a rabbi. It's a classic cop-out that goes right back to Adam and Eve in the garden, where no one could take responsibility for anything. And here you're dealing with 1,900 years of mass murder. I can understand why people don't want to take responsibility for it. So in that sense, when Claire talks about the Christian churches, the idolatry, the mass human sacrifice, is their human sacrifice of us, including 1.5 million children in the Nazi German genocide, where you murder with one hand with a sword and you urinated on us theologically with the other hand, and then call evil good. The mass human sacrifice was the sacrifice. In that sense, she's absolutely right. Where's the idolatry? Theft, murder, rape, and human sacrifice. You got it, and you did it. And you're warming up the orchestra to do it again, except God won't permit it, because the clock is running out, and we're all racing to Mount Sinai, Mount Moriah, Mount Horeb, and Mount Carmel for that final confrontation, because Claire in that sense is absolutely right. And there you're not dealing with the idolatry she's talking about, where you have 5 masses a day. And why do you reenact the crucifixion of Jesus? Because bluntly, you hate God, you hate yourselves, and you hate us because we remind you of God. And if you can't kill him, you'll kill us because you represent him. These are not abstract questions. And if 50,000 rockets are fired at Israel, you're still responsible because your existence is an existential act of aggression against the Creator, because you're the Christ-killing kikes and deicide-murdering yids of our theology. And no, Chief Rabbi Sachs would not have talked like that. That's okay. That's why I'm here to do it. And most Israeli organizational representatives or government representatives would never say it. That's why I'm saying it. And I've had people say, thank you for saying it, because we can't say that. In that sense, Claire is absolutely right about idolatry, but it's not primarily the issue of the concepts. It's the issue of the nonstop mass human sacrifice of us.
Well, I think they hurt themselves too, you know, in what they do with their wrong think, because I think that the clearest difference between those who are idolaters is that they don't follow God's laws, right? I mean, Hindus, they make up their own laws. Christians, they make up their own laws, apart from what they imperfectly try to follow from the Torah. And really, I would have thought that the only 2 religions acceptable to God would be Judaism and Islam, which I think is the most Noahide of the 4 Gentile religions. And I know, you know, people don't want to talk about ranking them, but the other question that I asked is whether she too is worse than Avodah Zarah has not been finally settled in rabbinical circles, has it?
Okay, I got to add a note there. Number 1, the halakha as a Jew, I don't know what you want to do it. You can pray in a mosque. It's not considered a house of idolatry. Secondly, Avodah Zarah, again, is not just about concepts. The real Avodah Zarah, again, you're looking at that package, theft, murder, rape, and child human sacrifice, which also involves wrong concepts, because if a person had the right ones, like Abraham, they wouldn't do it, because the God of Israel says, I don't want human sacrifice. It says it from A to Z in the Torah, the writings, and the prophets. So is she too idolatrous concept? In my opinion, I know there are various opinions on the subject, absolutely, but that's not enough. The package is if you look at the book of Kings, the king did what was right in the sight of the Lord, the king did what wasn't right, he was good and then became bad. It's always about actions, not about doctrines and theologies. And the idolatry they talk about under every leafy tree in the high places wasn't just going to Plato's retreat in New York and having an orgy. It almost invariably involves sacrificing someone. And they did this. That's why they also hated the ancient Israelites. What? You're going to tell us we can't do what we did? This is what it comes down to. It's very ugly. And yes, when they have the mass, whether it's consubstantiation, where it's symbolic, or transubstantiation, you have at churches where billions of people are going to eat the body and drink the blood of your slaughtered man god. That's pretty idolatrous. And where in transubstantiation, it's meant to be literal. That violates everything. You don't eat bodies, you don't drink blood of animals or people. All the Torah's laws. In that sense, you're right. And it's not surprising that then what happened to us. And if they could get away with it, they're warming up the orchestra right now to do it again. And remember this, one other thing. Verbal violence always precedes physical violence. It says before Cain murdered Abel, he went out to the field to exchange words with his brother. And then he killed him. And Abel was actually stronger than Cain. Cain had to deceive him into a vulnerable position so that Abel wouldn't kill Cain and defend himself. So these people, and I monitored them very carefully, especially the new Nazis. They're not neo-Nazis, not white supremacists, they're Nazis. Nazism is a Gnostic religion, going back to the beginning of time in various forms. When they always give this little clause, the Jew-hating preachers, it's always the pastors and the professors. Well, we don't call for violence against Jews. They know sooner or later, based on what they're saying and write. I read what they write, and I've read it before. I was accepted to a doctoral program, the Holocaust, to study history of Christian Jew hatred. Well, we don't encourage, because they know sooner or later someone's going to do it. Someone's going to say, I killed my neighbor, Mr. Schwartz, the pharmacist, because I saw person X's video that Jews are really reptilians from another alien demonic god. Yeah, they teach this stuff. And then the person who posted, well, I didn't call for violence against Jews. Don't give me that. I have family
all
members.
Evil comes from God, as well as all good comes from God.
Okay.
And anti-Semitism is an evil. Do you think God intended anti-Semitism?
The answer to that is a very short answer. In terms of predestination and free will, nothing can happen that God doesn't permit for reasons known only to himself. Whether suffering is the price of faith or the punishment of sin, sometimes this, sometimes that, or for reasons we don't know, there are reasons. I would be very careful about, the more the little old lady gets beat up by the mugger, well, what sin did she, must be worse, in which the victim becomes blamed for their own persecution. It's all of the above, and one should be very careful about ascribing. Of course, suffering has meaning. And again, there's no randomness in the creation. We talk about hashgachat prati, not fortuna. But to then say every time, if Chana Senish, I'll give you a Muslim example. Madeline, Noor Inayat Khan, the daughter of a great Sufi sheikh from India, became one of the British intelligence spies, was parachuted behind Nazi line. The Nazis caught her. She was a radio operator. There have been some films made about her. Daughter of an Indian Sufi sheikh, Hazrat Inayat Khan, the head of the Sufi Order of the West. And she volunteered, they didn't want her to go. She's a very pretty girl, and said, this isn't for you. Now I have to serve my country and fight evil. So the Nazis caught her, tortured her. She wouldn't give out any information, and they shot her. So if you follow that line of thinking, all the soldiers who died storming the beaches at Normandy, well, they're being punished for their sins. They got killed. This is craziness. Sometimes punishment, suffering is the price of faith, or Chana Senish, or the White Rose. Sophie Scholl had her head cut off in 1943 for resisting the three great ladies, one a Jew, one a Christian, and one a Muslim, a Sufi Muslim. Sometimes it's the price of faith, Rabbi Akiva and the martyrs. Sometimes it's punishment for sin. Sometimes we don't know why it is, but there's no randomness in the creation. So
may I suggest a reason? You were talking about pogroms, and as far as I know, pogroms was a way of the debtor escaping its creditor by kicking them out. So practicing usury created an advantage for the usurer, which eventually the debtor realized they would never pay off. So that's why they conducted all those pogroms. But Islam would prevent the practice of usury altogether. And I know that Hitler tried to abolish usury, but of course he couldn't, because he needed to finance his own imperial wars, and war finance is an arm of usury, is it not?
Well, if you look at money as goods and services, people who buy and sell money, the Torah says you shouldn't lend money to an Israelite on interest, but you may do so to a Gentile. Now, as long as it's like, say, you may or may not sell shoes to a Gentile. The Talmud says how much legitimate profit, I think, can be 20% above the cost of production, the time and the materials is 20%. Making a profit, running a store, you have Mrs. Thatcher's family had a grocery store. You buy a cheese, so you can add, the church is called a just price. There's nothing wrong with charging a small fee for,
as long as it's not based on interest. I mean, a flat fee would be fine.
A flat fee, some kind of fee for something.
As long as it's not compound interest.
That's where you get into the issue of a just price and an unjust price. So what's called usury, money is a means of exchange. I personally don't see anything wrong. You borrow money from a bank, The $100, you give it to $105, not $300,000.
There is a verse in the Quran that actually talks about a loan agreement and how many witnesses and what kind of witness.
Well, what they were dealing with, I don't know if you know, but I spent 3 years writing a book, 500-page research book called God's Cracking the Quran Code, God's Land, Torah, and People Covenants with Israel in the Quran and Islamic Tradition, written under the supervision of Muslim scholars. I will send you a copy. I published it 10 years ago. It's available for free download at my academia site. I'll make a note to put that in. What the Quran follows up is that interest-free loans, the same way like the Torah, which is to a believer in the Ummah. So you can lend money, they give it back to you. It's also based on the concept there won't be inflation, so the money will retain its value, which it will if you don't have a fiat currency and money is backed by gold or something real, which hopefully will be the case in the coming Messianic Israelite Yovel. But let's get back to what you were talking about, is the collapse of values and idolatry. Look at the world in which we're living now, in which up is down and down is up, and theft, murder, and rape are exploding all over the place. And which, well, you can see what's going on in England, the United States.
Yes, but that's caused by the sex revolution,
right.
You know, and because the Americans appeared not to, believe in any kind of sexual immorality, and perhaps sexual liberation is a way of distracting the Western voter from his troubles, because we have noticed over the decades that we get more and more sexual liberation, as if they're saying, here, have some more sex. If you're not happy with the government, have more different kinds of sex to take your mind off things. So maybe this is something that a lot of Westerners are hooked on, and this will exacerbate their social problems as well as their moral problems, which they will always blame on Jews.
Yeah, we're always the scapegoat, as you said, with the pogroms. You can't, the Kings did it too, borrow money from the Jew. You don't want to pay, or the Templars, or wherever it is you want to borrow it from, don't want to pay it back, accuse them of something, massacre them, expel them from your country, like the Huguenots were massacred and expelled from France.
That's because their religion is not working, and nobody will tell them. People are too afraid in case they get offended and bomb them or sanction them or something. And it seems that really, Muslims might say as much as they want that, the West should live under Sharia, but I think it needs a special status of God's chosen people to make that point.
We agree. And I'd like to introduce you, because I've spoken far too much, to Professor Mattathias, who knows about persecution by Christians. He was born in a cave in 1943 in Greece, saved by a Nazi, the head of the unit. They were looking for Jews to send them to the camps if they didn't kill them on the spot. And the head of the unit, the commander, said that the little boy, the baby, looks like my son in Hamburg. We're not here. We didn't see them. We're not coming back. And he was saved. They're also hidden by their Greek Christian neighbors. So Asher can tell you about anti-Semitism, Jew hatred in Greece, not just theological in the teachings, but practice. What happened to the Jews? He knows what you're talking about. And therefore, you should really, I gave my spiel. Les was absolutely right about, in my opinion, did the Sanhedrin hand, based on what, reading the sources? No, but because it became the state religion of the Roman Empire, that doesn't look good. So you have to blame it all on the Jews. They've been doing that since then. And Pontius Pilate is Nobel Peace Prize winner, BS. So he's right about that. So let's give this to Asher, who knows what anti-Semitism is. Les has experienced more of it from South Africa. People, you stop at a traffic light, you get shot. Every time Les goes back to South Africa, there's less people he knows alive because they're dead. I experienced that across the Tappan Zee Bridge in Westchester. So let's talk to Asher.
Well, and Miriam and Asher, I have to go, but I'm going to still keep it on because I'm recording.
Good.
So, Claire, I really want to thank you very, very much. And just know that you're very welcome. And when you come to Israel, I'll take you our shul. I'll introduce you to, we have amazing rabbis here. everybody that I've ever brought to the show, and I actually brought a group of South African blacks, whites, and coloreds. They all came to our show on Erev Shabbos, and they were welcomed. And there's Haredi, there's very, very religious, less religious. It's a whole mishmash of everybody, but they were welcomed immensely. And that's it. So you're
come
very
and visit
welcome
us
to
in
come
Jerusalem, and come and visit Professor Mattathias, who's one of the
In
heads
New
of the Greek
York.
Jewish
I would
community in
love
New
to.
York. And
10
now
minutes away from Kennedy Airport.
Les does a Zoom session with
over
his
to-
family and friends in South Africa, because he has to go for that, and I'll handle
all the
concluding
very
the
best.
program.
And thank you so much, Lal. And it's been a pleasure and an honor, really.
I'm so sorry, I need to leave as well. Thank you so much, and I'm going to listen to the end of the talk on YouTube. It's very, very interesting. Thank you very, very much, and I'll
Okay,
listen.
Asher and I will take
Nice
it
to
from
meet
here,
you, Miriam.
Miriam.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank
Let's
you.
talk a bit more at some
Take
point,
care,
maybe.
Miriam.
That would be lovely.
Be well. Be
Thank
well.
you.
Yeah.
Bye.
I'm so happy that that Claire brought us together, and we have been disputatious in the
Right.
typical Jewish way. I came across the Noahide laws by accident about a dozen years ago. I frequently am at the United Nations around the time of the observance of the Holocaust, and Rabbi Cohen was in charge of this. He approached me and he said, "Please come and speak to us." I wonder, first off, whether the Noahide laws promotion and propagation is towards the outreach to the non-Jews, or the Jews. Are there doubters among Jews? I wonder. I don't think so. I think that's given. But going back to so many things that you touched on, all of you. One, it starts with words, no question about it. This feeling of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred.
But if you prevent them from expressing it, they want to express it even more. And if you stop them from expressing it, they'll hate you even more.
Yeah. With a name like Asher, I couldn't very well hide in my classroom. I was the sole Jewish boy. And of course, I was made fun of, Jew boy. And around Holy Week, they would gather, a bunch of kids would gather in front of our house to sing the tropes of his hanging, his crucifixion, and the blame that we were to blame. And my mother, I remember her, may she rest in peace, would open the shutters and say, "There's nothing wrong with the day." Oh, the song was Simera Mavro Surano, Simera Mavrimera. Today is a black day. It's a black sky. No, the sky is beautiful. Get out of here. So I know that I live with this. Another observation Lowell made about Isaac and Abraham. The question was, why didn't Abraham dispute the order to sacrifice his son? God actually wanted him to do it, and because he didn't do it, because again he was acculturated in his time to and knew about human sacrifice, he was willing to go through, but that was the end of it. And our example for ages since has been to not have human sacrifices, to substitute daily prayers for sacrifices, whether it was animal or human. We are destined to be opposed and to be hated, if you will, by non-Jews, simply because our very existence is a rebuke to them. That
well, if they're not righteous Gentile nations, if they don't enjoy good government, if they feel oppressed by their own government, they will blame you. And if you don't promote the Noahide laws, they won't enjoy good government, will they?
I didn't get the point.
If Jews do not teach the Noahide laws to Gentiles so that their nations follow them, then Gentiles will suffer from oppression from their government.
Perhaps, but about Constantine and Paul, those are two examples, amazing examples of early anti-Semites. There's nothing worse sometimes than an apostate who turns to a new faith. Paul was the soul, as you know, and he converted, and then he began to preach to Salonican Jews, for example, in Greece, and only to be rejected. And that turned him into the prototypical anti-Semite. Constantine, likewise, persecuted Christians until the eve of a battle, as according to tradition, where he saw a vision of the cross, telling him that by this cross you will prevail tomorrow in battle. And he did. And he not only converted, but then, as you, I think, suggested, he imposed the religion on the entire Eastern Empire.
Well, that is the thing. The whole story of Christianity is about the monarch doing the deal with the monarch did a deal with the Catholic Church. And basically, the Catholic Church, the missionaries who came to England, wherever, were saying, look, we come from Rome, the people who invaded you and took you over. Well, we come from there, and we've got this hot new religion that you might like to have instead of your backward paganism. We're from Rome. We know the eternal city, and therefore we know what we're about. So why don't you use our religion? We'll have a cardinal by your side to tell you what to do. And this was how it worked. They were all forcibly converted. The only person who wasn't forcibly converted was a monarch who made the bargain with the Catholic Church. And then everybody else was forcibly converted. And if they didn't like it, they would get burnt at the stake. And they blame you. Quite a few of them say, well, these Jews, they created Christianity, didn't they? These Gentiles suffered as a result of being Christian when they took their religion seriously, they do blame Jews. And it's like, you can't deny that, Paul, heretic though he was a Jew, and Jesus was a Jew. So unless Jews
among some
somehow slough off this guilt by teaching the Noahide laws properly, it will always come back to it, I think.
Among some Greeks I encounter, there is even dispute about whether Jesus was a Jew. They consider him a Palestinian in today's version, so that they can ingratiate themselves with the Palestinians. And when I propose that, can we at least agree on 5 facts: that he was born a Jew, that he was circumcised, that he ate kosher, that he held the Passover Seder, and that he died a Jew. And these basic facts are not always accepted. So,
well, the thing was, if he was crucified for blasphemy, he must have been blaspheming as a Jew, because it would, why would Jews crucify a Gentile for blaspheming against their God? So the very fact that, which is a Christian narrative, that Jesus was convicted of blasphemy must mean that he was a Jew.
yeah.
Well, first of all, it's a question, what are they even talking about? I've read the Greek Testament several times. I don't claim any expertise in it, but I can't see anything that Jesus, again, first of all, the Gospels that we have are the ones that the church fathers chose to keep after getting rid of hundreds of others centuries later. They were written decades after Jesus lived, if he lived at all. It's not clear if I actually read what Jesus said that could possibly constitute blasphemy. And then one would have to define, what does that mean? Jesus is asked, what's the most important commandment? He says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, he quotes Deuteronomy 4:6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. This is the fundamental Jewish teaching. And furthermore, when a Jew dies, natural causes or martyrdom, that's supposed to be the last word, Shema. Jesus says in Matthew 23, verses 1 through 3, the scribes and the Pharisees are the authorized interpreters of God's law. Therefore, do what they tell you. He's acknowledging the authority of the oral law. In John 4, he says, we know what we believe. You don't know what you believe. To the Samaritan woman, salvation is from the Jews. I don't think the Christians have any idea what they're talking about anymore. They talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. There have been some very good. Rabbi Harvey Falk wrote an excellent book in which he analyzes the issues of law discussed by Jesus and the Pharisees. Well, there are different groups of Pharisees, Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, and places those discussions within the context of the halakhic discussions between the different schools at the time.
Yes,
So,
and talking about Pharisees, I think we have to remember how anti-Semitic the New Testament is. They're always talking about the Pharisees going around, trying to get Jesus on something or other. And what they do is simply, and I think some of them know that rabbis are the descendants of Pharisees, aren't they?
well, wait a
And
minute.
what they do to remind themselves of how much they hate Jews is to read the New Testament about, particularly that bit of how mean the Pharisees were to Jesus.
Well, there, it's a question of who's doing the interpreting. There's also a verse in the Greek Testament. I don't have a New Testament because I don't have an old one. It says a Pharisee came to warn Jesus that the police are coming to get you, and he left. If you look very closely, you can see that there are different groups of Pharisees. There was Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. There certainly were more than that. But the way it's been, again, texts are only as good in any religion as the people who interpret them. You can get texts to say anything you want. And this is where you have the trouble, because what happened in the first 4 centuries after Jesus was here was the church fathers developed the theology of genocide against Jews. And therefore, it's not surprising that there's an autobahn that runs from the gospel to the gas chambers, down which we've been forced march for 19 centuries, culminating in the Holocaust in the heart of Christian Europe. So it's as it's interpreted. There have been in Islam and Christianity, philo-Judaic, I don't want to use the term Semitic, underground traditions from the very beginning, which didn't interpret it that way, which said, wait a minute, your God's chosen. This comes to another point. The Quran, the New Greek Testament, and the Tanakh all confirm the critical covenants, land, Torah, and people. God gave the land of Israel to the children of Israel. God gave the Torah to the children of Israel. And God chose the children of Israel to believe in him and live according to the Torah. And the land of Israel equals MC squared, that's it. And part of that is teaching the universal laws to the nations.
May I make a point
You're right about that. We have to do that. The Rebbe was, who am I to say the Rebbe was right? Of course the Rebbe was right. We have to live according to the Torah, because you can't have it both ways. Say, look, I want you to be good while I'm busy being Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, and Bernard Madoff. You got to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. So you need people who live in a moral community or in a moral country. And then also to say, especially as you're absolutely right, with the collapse of traditional Christian civilization and whatever, there's a God, basic laws, that's collapsing. There's a moral vacuum. And the children of Israel, were 12 tribes, have to tell, you're absolutely right. All the nations of the world, there's a God, he has a moral order. You have to behave yourself. We do too. So you're completely right about that. And maybe that is this time in history, the end, new beginning of days, that just as the physical empires collapse, the spiritual empires are also collapsing. And there's this values vacuum. And therefore, your message is critical. Who do you go to? Salvation is from the Jews, like Jesus said. And couldn't be a more important time now that to do that, we deal with people, myself, with the root and branches for non-Jews of all shapes and sizes who love Jews, Aborigines from Australia, Native Americans, Native shamans from Canada, Hindus, they all saying, come and teach us, like it says in Jeremiah. In the end of days, the nations will come and say, lies and vanities have we inherited from our fathers. Teach us the way of God. But
But idolatry needs to be defined, surely.
agreed. There's no, certainly we have to tell them there's one God, not three gods. There's no question about that. And there are rabbis who try to, well, you know, make them not feel so uncomfortable. Maybe they get depressed, they'll have a nervous breakdown. The answer is absolutely.
And the other thing is that rabbis need to decide which is worse, associating partners with God, which is shituf, or avodah zarah, which is mere idolatry.
Wait
and I don't think the rabbinical opinion is quite settled on this.
Wait a minute. We got to get back from abstractions to actions. Avodah zarah, as defined in the Talmud, always involves not, again, we got to get out of Oxford and Cambridge University, then Eton and Harrow, and down to bodies and body parts. Idolatry, as our sages understand it, is not merely wrong concepts. That's part of it, but it's a package. Wrong, of course, it's
worshiping anything that isn't God. Yes.
Not. Oh, that's bad enough.
And confusing
again,
the creator and his creation.
I have to go back to the point of actions, not just concepts, because a person can have all the wrong
Deciding
ideas.
is an action.
Where, again, the package and the package for us, because our teaching is not just another school of philosophy in Athens or Rome or at the Sorbonne, is a package of theft, murder, rape, and child human sacrifice, which of course come out of wrong concepts, otherwise you wouldn't do them in the first place. So it's not enough simply to have the wrong ideas.
But the Noahide laws already forbid theft, murder, and rape, don't they? So we don't need to go over that. We just need to discover.
The Noahide laws have a package. Idolatry, wrong concepts about God. You can't murder. You can't rape, you can't steal. Actually, the third of the 10 commandments involves kidnapping. What it talks about theft, it means people. And the punishment for kidnapping a person is death. Yes. There's no concept of their guilt, like in Germany. Well, I can pay money as compensation. Did I kill someone in your family? Or here's $50. Here's $55. It doesn't work. So again, in our thinking, we don't separate between concepts and actions. Whereas in the Christian churches, people killed each other over how you define the truth. They did this, as Asher and I discussed the other day. The Crusaders on their way to Jerusalem sacked Constantinople because you had the wrong ideas.
They didn't have as many restrictions. You can bring yourself to say that Jesus is God, and if you die and if
you look at the book of Acts,
you get to heaven, basically, if you still believe that Jesus is God. That's their bargain.
In Christianity and Islam, you have the basic Noahide covenant laws. You find them in the book of Acts, chapter 15, where there's a discussion between James and the Council of Jerusalem and Paul, and the Pharisees said, well, we brought some new believers. Can they be saved? Don't they have to observe all of our teachings? And well, no, actually, if they're non-Jewish believers in Jesus, whatever that means, they have to follow the basic Noahide covenants and laws. Don't murder, don't this, don't eat the blood of sacrifice to idols. So Christianity isn't simply just believing in, at least in principle, but when you take, again, the terrible...
But the doctrine of the Trinity offends against the third principle of Judaism.
Of course it does. But that's
it's idolatry, but
it's an idolatrous concept. But avodah zarah, as defined by our sages, is more than just concepts. It involves actions. And you see this split in Western thinking with Bertrand Russell, who made the following incredibly stupid statement. He was teaching a course on ethics at Oxford, or was at Cambridge, and he was caught in bed with the wife of one of his colleagues. So he was asked, excuse me, Professor Russell, you're teaching a course on ethics. Is that ethical? And listen how stupid it, he wouldn't have gotten to Swarthmore College. Girls, I've got to do something here. He said, you don't have to be a triangle to teach mathematics. What a moron. Ethics refers to mitzvot bein adam l'chavero, social relations. What if in my ethical system, it's okay to murder, rape, and steal? Say, look, it's a stupid answer.
If adultery were a sexual offence,
excuse me?
If adultery, which I assume that was what Bertrand Russell was guilty of, were a sexual offence, and I believe in American, quite a few American states, it still is officially a criminal offence, is it not?
No, his point was something completely different, which you don't have to be ethical to teach ethics. But that's a stupid statement because ethics refers to systems of human behavior. And he could say, well, look, in my ethical system, it's okay to have wife swapping. But that wasn't his point. He was saying, okay, what I did wasn't ethical, but you don't have to
do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
even that was a dumb statement for a person who was teaching a course in philosophy, because all he had to do was say, look, I follow Stalinist communist ethics or Maoist communist ethics or Hitler's Nazi ethics. And in my ethics, it's okay to exterminate 80% of the Slavs or 20% of the Jews. Or I'm from an African tribe where the queen has 20 husbands, or a guy has le duxine bureau. This is called that's a fancy name for having a girlfriend. It's okay. That's not the point. My point is... But I think
the problem is that there is such a difference between what is in theory immoral and what is illegal. So if you don't have a law that forbids these things, then people will say, well, it's not against the law, is it, what I did?
I agree
it's
with
not
you
against the law for me to have sex with your wife because, So really, Islam actually sees the logic of your laws being in harmony with your moral system.
Exactly.
Because, whatever it forbids, it's going to be the law that says you can't do all these things. So Bertrand Russell wouldn't just say, oh, it's okay, I haven't done anything wrong, but because, he would be considered a sex offender if he were caught.
Well, in his, that's true. But for him, it's like, I don't have to be moral to teach morality. And again, you get down to the problem.
But I suppose in a way he has a point, because nobody is morally perfect. We can say, you're not supposed to do that, but oops, I did that. Oh, but maybe I got away with it. Or, don't do as I do, just do as I say, because you get into trouble like me if you do what
my background's in religion and the philosophy and science, and I went to a college founded by Philadelphia, by Welsh Quakers called Swarthmore. There were three, Swarthmore, Haverford, and Bryn Mawr. Bertrand Russell was saying, it's okay to be hypocritical, to say this and do this, that. Now, in theory, a Christian, a Jew, a Muslim would be saying, well, you're not supposed to say this and do that. You have to walk the walk, not talk the talk. But as you yourself have pointed out, and you're living in London, we have a time of when there's a complete collapse of values, that's when the Israelite, we're 12 tribes of Jacob, Israel. This can't be emphasized enough. We're waiting for the return of the lost tribes. You might be part of that yourself. We don't know. The 12 tribes are much bigger than what we know as the Jews in the land of Israel abroad. And one point Christians don't like to be minded about: why is the number of Jews today the same as 2,000 years ago in the Roman Empire? Because you kept killing us off and making life so difficult and miserable that not many of us survived. And then we lost another 6 million. Some people say, well, it wasn't 6. Would it make you feel better if it was 5? What if it's 7? There's a Catholic priest named Pastor Dubois, who's busy digging up graves all over Eastern Europe. He's finding graves every week. They didn't even know were there. There may be more. So playing a numbers game is obscene. I'm agreeing with you. Your message, I'm also agreeing with you that as their systems collapse, economic, political, social, who gets blamed? As you said, whatever it is, I owe you money or whatever it is, it's your fault, the Jew.
Yes, and you could, mitigate that and say, well, really, we should have been teaching you the Noahide
give you
laws.
an- I'd give you-
We didn't because we were scared because of all the
Exactly.
terrible things you did to us.
Right.
So, you know, sorry, but, you know, surely you understand because you were so mean to us.
For that,
So,
we-
but
we have-
now we feel we should warn and advise you
Agreed.
that you're not going to be, you know, surviving for any, you know, no
Yeah.
society can do without a moral system.
Many years
and
ago,
what they do is the opposite of morality.
exactly. Asher, hold on. Many years ago, because we established with my colleague, Rabbi Yoshua Friedman, one of the founders of the Israelite pioneering community of Kochav Shachar overlooking Philistine chaos occupied Jericho, and that won't be going on much longer, the Noah Institute, to do our little part in teaching the Noahide covenant and laws. So we brought a group of Christian students in Jerusalem who were interested in Jewish teachings to Rabbi Aryeh Carmel. He's no longer alive. He was from Manchester, as was Rabbi Baruch Horowitz. They were the founders of Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim, where I studied for a few months because my friend said, listen, you don't need Yiddishkeit, you need Englishkeit. You're so polite, you'll go there. And we had tea time every day at 4, Claire, with nice English tea with all the guys in the black hats, but it was nice English tea. So they said exactly what you said to the rabbi. Why didn't you tell us about this? The rabbi said, listen, we were just glad you didn't have a pogrom, like Claire said, didn't kill us. We weren't going to go down in the Ukrainian village to the square or outside the church and start handing out flyers from the Rebbe. We were afraid. You were right. And to a large extent, unfortunately, they're still afraid, especially look what's going on. But this more than ever, you're absolutely right, is the time for rabbis to accelerate their outreach because the world is so desperately in need of it.
I don't know if you're aware of this story. The story you mentioned kites, and
Yes.
with your permission, you may already know the story of how that term became to be synonymous for Jews. Do you know the story behind it?
I read it once, but my point was that's how they see us. That's not how I see us. That for them and their theology, bluntly, we're the Christ-killing kikes and deicide murdering yids. All of us since then. And that sounds awful because it is awful. That's not how I view myself. We're the 12 tribes of Israel and God's chosen people. We may not always act that way, but that's how they view us, and that's what their theology teaches. And I've now started a monthly seminar. What was the first one? Asher, was Sunday night? When was it? It was on Tuesday, called From Gospel to Gas Chamber.
Yes.
History of the Holocaust and Jew Hatred. And as we go along each month, I wrote a paper when I was studying Jewish history for 2 years at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, called Chorus of Joy. That's meant satirically Jew hatred in the writing of the church fathers. When one reads what these people said, it's in translation, it can't get worse. And for the people of the Eastern churches, like Asher, Greek, Russian, Orthodox, their holy man isn't Martin Luther. He's bad enough for the Lutherans. It's John Chrysostom, who makes Martin Luther look pretty tame. So yeah, for them, that's how they view us. Let's not sanitize it. And it's very evil. And it has implications. Because if you pump that crap into people's heads long enough, even when they'll say, I'm not a Christian anymore, I'm a socialist, a communist, a Marxist, it's
They
in the
can still
blood.
hate you without
Exactly.
believing.
Exactly.
But
It's
may I
in their
make the-
spiritual genetics. Please do.
The story about kites was, I was told that there were these East European Jews who didn't know anything other than they were immigrating into a country that was dominated by Christians. And when they arrived at, which port was this? The one they arrived in New York. Anyway,
It
they were
was
made
New
to fill.
Amsterdam. You mean under Peter, what was the governor of New Amsterdam
Stuyvesant.
before?
Stuyvesant.
Peter Stuyvesant. Right, Peter
No,
Stuyvesant.
these were East European Jews who had just arrived in New York.
That was about 1900. That was 300 years later. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and which port is it that they would arrive in?
It would normally be New York City, Ellis Island. My grandparents
That's the one.
came
That's the
through
one.
there.
Ellis Island. Anyway,
Yes.
they arrived at Ellis Island, and they were made to fill forms in, and
Yes.
they were told to cross particular bits of the form to indicate yes or no or whatever, as you do in form, so that they wouldn't cross it out. They wouldn't use a cross because they suspected that they were being tricked into affirming Jesus or something, and they used a circle instead. And keikel is circle in,
A circle,
in
kite came from
Yiddish.
circle. That is fascinating.
And that's how the word came into use to describe, to call Jews. But I think these Jews actually, made a much better point of affirming their hatred of idolatry than any subsequent rabbi that prospered in America.
That's a wonderful story. I didn't know it until now, and I've learned something new. I know our own girls in school here, many times they say, don't make a cross, like you say, make a different sign because that represents the cross of the Christians. Let me ask you a question, Claire. You're a very articulate and educated spokesman for Jews in Israel, and we're very fortunate to have you as an ally and a spokeswoman. What is your, I know you're in England, but what is your own ethnic background? Are you a first or second or third generation immigrant to England? Where did your family come from, if I may ask?
I was born in Malaysia, so I'm not even a first generation person because I came to Britain. Malaysia is a Muslim country. I am Chinese.
Well, there we get. I thought something like that, Malaysian or Polynesian, looking at you, and I want to say that in terms of laws, I know what happened to the Chinese in the 1960s in Indonesia. Nobody even remembers how many hundreds of thousands were murdered. Nobody even talks about it. Was it 100? It's hard to even relate to those numbers. To murder hundreds of thousands of people, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. Pardon me? Malaysia, Indonesia, East Timor.
Yeah.
How many ethnic Chinese were murdered? Suharto, Sukarno. This is something you know. So you know what violating the basic laws means from your own families there. What are the real numbers?
Minorities are always blamed when law and order breaks down.
Right.
And which is why I think it's so crucial that Jews, actually teach the Noahide laws so that standards of government in Gentile nations, who will hopefully, become righteous Gentile Noahide nations, will be better, so the people won't feel oppressed by their unjust government and see Jews as somehow doing better than them always, and see them as part of the political establishment and blame them for it.
Look
So,
what happens.
it's not just Jews who get blamed. I think, there's a lot of dislike of Chinese.
Look what happened in Los
Lebanese,
Angeles.
the Lebanese are not.
Any minority that's successful in any way, Asher knows it as a Greek. If you're successful, and look what happened to the Koreans with the Black riots in 1992 in Los Angeles. Jealousy and resentment there's a reason the Torah says you shall not envy and covet what your neighbor has.
Yes.
Natural human in our fallen state since expulsion from the Gan Eden. That's what we do. And if we don't do it, that's exceptional. We jealous and resentful people, they're richer or smarter or whatever it is that we think they have, they don't have, and how the Chinese, before we came to Israel in 1992, we lived right next to Chinatown, and they have a statue of Confucius. And I remember passing the statue and reading what was written. I said, this is a Chinese Moses. Confucius is a Chinese Moses, because what he's teaching is almost as if it's right out of the Torah. And so the remarkable success in every way of Chinese people people think for some reason Confucius was just giving an ethical system and he had no belief in a supreme being. That's not true. Or did Lao Tzu? That's a whole nother question. But
the mandate of heaven precedes Confucius anyway.
Right. Well, you would know this better than me because I'm not native Chinese, but it was wonderful to live. I saw how the Chinese culture expanded street by street. and devastation was replaced by restaurants, little Buddhist houses of worship, or little Christian houses of worship, laundries, and the local tongs and triads came and told the local bums disappear, which they did. And I watched the city come back to life, and I saw what happened: people who build and plant and create, as opposed to people who devastate and destroy. And you knew Jews and Chinese got along very well. You know the joke. Used to be in the old days, you can't have a Jewish neighborhood without a mikveh or a shul. But as Jews became acculturated to America, you can't have a Jewish neighborhood without a Chinese restaurant. That's the joke among us. So we knew if you're walking at night, and we were on one side was Puerto Rican neighborhood and the other side is a black neighborhood, and I knew the invisible line. You don't cross that at night. Maybe you don't cross it during the day. But if you saw a group of Chinese kids coming along at 3 a.m, they were discussing what to do to get into MIT. They weren't thinking of who they could rape, steal, or murder. That's the reality. And there you see the importance of the strong family structures, the values. I'm going to send you a link. There's a wonderful restaurant on Mott Street called the Buddha Bodhi Restaurant. And it is Chinese vegan under a hashgacha of Satmar, I think, from Brooklyn. She's astonishing sights. I've been there. And in the middle of the winter, at one table in the Streimels and the Hasidim, and in the other table, in the middle of the winter, come the Buddhist monks with the robes and sandals in the middle of the rain and the snow. They're all very happy together. This is very New York, in a good sense, a good multiculturalism. So you know what for people who are ethnic Chinese, I don't also have to remind you what people in the West don't like to talk about: the drugging of China in the 19th century by the British. And the Opium Wars.
Well, I suppose these things, well, nations behave like gangsters towards other nations. So gangsters would deal in drugs.
Exactly.
But what should be more of concern to Western nations is that they're happy to drug their own people. They're legalizing all kinds of drugs to keep their own population under sedation.
Exactly. And also to make money. You get into another issue of how black operations are funded by various intelligence agencies. And one of the ways is the global drug trade, which is why after America invaded Afghanistan in 1991, was it in December, after 9/11, leaving outside the question of who did it, heroin production went up. Heroin production went up. There are outfits that finance their operation with those illegal drugs. That's another very hot potato. As you can tell, I'm a great admirer of British civilization, Cromwell's New Model Army. I'm a great Chinese admirer of Chinese religion and culture tremendously. I'm very glad to hear about your own background.
Well, it's necessary in a way that the Chinese were humiliated to realize how backward they had become in a way, because they thought, oh, that, they were the, masters of the universe, and nobody was as civilized as them until the white man turned up with, all
Let
his
me ask you a question about that. How long have you lived in England? Did you immigrate to England from Malaysia yourself?
I arrived as a student, and I've lived more than half my life here.
You are a spokesperson for authentic Torah values. Now, how do very anti-Jewish and very have you ever been attacked physically for your views, which are, you're going to make a lot of people upset, and people get upset, they can get very unpleasant. How are you treated as a spokesman for Israel, for universal Jewish teachings? How are you, and also being of an ethnic Chinese background in England, how do they feel, how do people from the old Church of England feel about you telling them off? I mean, you're right.
Well, I don't tell them off in person. And actually, this is the first time I've actually shown myself on your honorable channel.
We consider that a privilege.
because I didn't think a black rectangle would be sufficiently persuasive. But no, I don't go around insulting people, you know, in person. It's more efficient to do it at one remove behind
I
the
didn't mean in
safety of a
person.
computer screen.
I mean, you're
So-
talking about entire religious. I don't mean specifically to insult a specific person, but you're making radical, but from our perspective, true theological statements about entire religious groups. And clearly the scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites that run them, who find their power threatened by someone like you, also you're a woman, you're Chinese, you're an immigrant to England, you're telling all these people off. The little boy or the young lady who says the emperor has no clothes, the emperors don't like little boys and young ladies.
Yeah, we don't know what happened to the little boy, do we?
No, oh, that's a good point. What happened? Hans Christian Andersen doesn't say, when I look at you, forgive me, maybe you like the reference, I see Mulan. Mulan, for me, is the Chinese Deborah. Our girls grew up, it's very corny, on Disney's Mulan, and they never got tired of seeing the films. I think the music is wonderful, and every time I meet anyone of a Chinese background and I mention Mulan, it's like you mentioned Joan of Arc to a French person. Do you even know who she is? She's the Chinese Deborah. She led the armies to victory. You seem to me that the spirit of Mulan lives in you, because you're very courageous to, in a sexist, male-dominated world, and in England and Chinese, to speak out like you do requires tremendous courage. Asher, I'm going to hand it over to Asher now, because I've talked far too much.
Yeah.
Because Asher knows what persecution means, and also patriarchal societies where women serve coffee of themselves and they keep their mouths shut. So what you're doing is, I'm glad, I consider it a privilege you agreed to come
I
and
feel
talk
like
in our forum.
I feel like the boy who put
It's very nice of
his
you to
finger in
remember
the
that.
dike, because there's no one around to do it. That's why I do it.
Thanks,
You know,
thank you for doing it.
I marry my wife in a typical or maybe atypical Chinese mode 13 days after I met her. So on the first morning after the first night together, I wake up and and she decides to bring me coffee in bed, Turkish coffee. I said, wow, that I did. My father used to do it for my mother, I said, but I don't recall that my mother would do that for my father. I like this. And ever since, now she stopped it after 51 years of marriage. She stopped it, but she still prepares it the night before so I can wake up and brew it. I have been trying to shed some of that patriarchy in all the years that we've been in America, you know, and fortunately we have 3 daughters, and they were immediately on my case to make me more receptive to democracy with a small d within the family, you know, to participate in input. And I wanted you to know that I think America is not perfect by far, and there are contradictions there. But thanks to the Enlightenment and the French Revolution and the American Revolution and the push to liberalize American society, we are less effused with this notion of superiority. Keep in mind that the Puritans left England to purify their religion in America. Then they turn around to condemn and persecute all non-Puritans until Roger Williams came along and said, hey, enough of that. We're all, we should be equal, but Jews were always the last to get the benefits of that change. In America today, and for the last several generations, there is a kind of defanging of religion, you know, it doesn't mean that we are becoming less religious, but more, maybe more ethical. You know, there is a so-called ethical culture society in America, which attempts to incorporate many of the Noahide laws, I think, in daily living. So to the extent
Does it?
that
I wasn't aware of that.
yeah, to the extent that we try to do that, to the extent that you mentioned the sexual revolution of the 60s, particularly, you know, Betty Friedan, etc. The fact that we are equalizing our society, we still, if women get 80 cents to a men's dollar, and getting rid of racism, you know, maybe the second reconstruction will bring that about, means that we are conscious that we're not perfect, but we are still prudish. We still have this dichotomy, this schizophrenia, if you will. We are progressive, yet we're also very reactionary in some cases.
I think Americans need to decide, you know, what laws they want to follow, and I mean, there is a way of really working out how to do it. I mean, you know, if somebody rejects the Noahide laws because they're Jewish, then they're anti-Semites, right?
Right.
Yes.
You know, it's like there's just no need to even argue about it. Why would you object to the first 5 laws forbidding murder, forbidding theft, forbidding sexual immorality, forbidding eating an animal while it's alive, and having a court and legal system? Why would you? You know, unless you know you're an idolater. Why are you an idolater?
Exactly. In fact, the sages say that one of the main reasons that the ancient nations followed idolatrous religious beliefs was that they could do all of that and not feel guilty about it. Exactly as you're saying. So the concepts are very important.
You're not following God's laws at all, you know, because the New Testament isn't from God. We know it was written by mortal men.
Agreed. This is
and various versions of it too.
This is why there's, as far as I know, there's nothing in Hindu, Buddhist, Taoist, Confucius traditions about Jews at all. There's no, as my friend, in 2,000 years of Jewish settlement in India, there's never been a pogrom, ever, even from the Muslims there. Never happened.
Well, because Muslims wouldn't be practicing usury anyway, so there would be no reason for them to get upset at you.
Regarding the issue of lending money on interest, what was his name? At the time of the Crusades, first of all, it wasn't just Jews. One of the great Christian Catholic is Abbot, what was his name, of Cluny? He protected Jews in the Rhineland from even worse massacres. And Rashi, one of the rabbis at the time, had said, if it wasn't for that good man, we'd all be dead. And in his letter to the churches in England and in Europe, he said, you accuse the Jews of being lending money, but I have to tell you, brothers, that some of our money lenders make the Jews look good, that they're much more honest and decent when they lend money than our guys who will eat the bone and the marrow. It's a very famous mystic and Catholic cleric of the time. So the issue of money lending in terms of hating Jews in Christian history. My doctorate was going to be on the history of Christian Jew hatred and what the churches did and didn't do before and after the Holocaust. The real picture is worse than anybody wants to know. They had all sorts of reasons to hate Jews, not just because of lending money. Anything you can possibly think of that you can blame on the Jews. That we got sick, it's your fault. There's the Black Death, it's your fault. The host was desecrated, it's your fault.
But scapegoating is a Jewish idea, is it not?
Well, the idea of, if you look in the idea
the Yom Kippur ritual of
in ancient religions, the idea of putting the sins of the community on a sacrificial offering, human or animal, is
Therapeutic,
widespread.
presumably.
It goes, Cain and Abel gave offerings, so you find that in the Torah too. Don't sacrifice people, just, please do it, a sheep, please, or a bird. But this is in all ancient cultures. The idea of substitutionary atonement till today is, we'll put our sins on you. Now, you dealt with the issue of sexual immorality. In cases of child abuse, in almost every case where now people a little bit talk about it. Let's go back a couple of decades when you didn't talk about it. In Oprah Winfrey, I'm not a fan of Oprah Winfrey, but she had a lot of people on her shows, kids who were abused. It was usually by a trusted, a pillar of the community. And in almost every case, who became the enemy of the people? Not the child who was abused, not the person in the community who stood up to protect them.
the accuser.
They became the enemies of the people, and the community to maintain its silence is not peace, but people can say, you're rocking the boat. That's the pastor, that's the head of the local, I don't know, the Rotary Club, and you're saying that she did this to, or the local priest or minister did this to that little girl, little boy. Well, you're the troublemaker. For some reason, there's a need to it's almost like the victim becomes the perpetrator. We're going to make you the sacrificial offering for the sins of our community. We just put them on you, and everything's turned inside out, rather than the victim and the one who stands up for them being the heroes. No, it's like in Heinrich Ibsen's The Enemy of the People, as the doctor says, wait a minute, the waters here are poisoned, but their whole income depends on that, so he becomes the enemy of the people. Now I ask you a question as a young woman from China, from Malaysia, ethnic Chinese living in England and speaking out, writing so eloquently and forcefully. Have you ever been threatened by anyone to stop talking or writing the way that you do? Because you're the one who puts the finger in the dike. That I agree completely. Very courageous of you as a woman, as ethnic Chinese, as an immigrant to England. You're telling them things which there are a lot of powers that be will say, listen, it says you arrived yesterday and you'll judge us today. That's what they said to Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah said. He says, these are my guests, don't touch them. They said, what, you arrived yesterday and you'll be the judge today? How are you treated by people in England?
Well, the usual predictable insults and mockery.
Any violence? Any threats of violence?
Let's hope not.
Okay, good, because it should stay that way.
Amen.
Do you have co-workers or people who, in England, for example, who share your spiritual, not outside the Jewish community, who share your approach to spreading universal Jewish teachings to the world that you can talk to, or do you feel rather lonely in your quest?
Well, I have a YouTube channel, so I guess I
know, I
can
subscribe
talk about
to it.
Oh,
I
thank
subscribe
you.
to it.
Thank you. I suppose the people who know me quite well would have some awareness of my views, but I don't talk too much politics with people I already know in real life. Just because I value my friendship with them too much, and if they're not in agreement, if they don't want to talk about these things, there's no need to push it down their throat when I've got the internet to do it in. The reason why I think Christianity is broken is that nobody cares. You can say as much as you like why you think Christianity is idolatry, and nobody cares. They don't care.
Right.
They literally, because probably you can't find a single believing Christian who actually believes in it, so they don't care. Most people are atheists. So, an atheist would just think that somebody who worships just one God or many gods or God in three forms but they've been just as silly as each other, so they don't make a big deal of it. So I'm saying that Christianity really is kaput. That there is no Western moral system in operation apart from intersectional feminism, and that the West is in mortal peril.
Asher, the young lady, that's meant to be, that's a sign of respect. That's not meant to be condescending in any way.
Complimentary.
The young lady is, do you wish to comment on, I mean, she's making very profound statements about the collapse of values in the West. Anyone who can't see that can't see, and that a vacuum is very dangerous, like Joseph was in the pit, that the text says the pit was empty, but the rabbis say no, it's filled with snakes and scorpions. Nature abhors a vacuum, whether it's spiritual or physical. So as Claire says, she's got the finger in the dike, and then the collapse of values is very bad for us. So we see the physical attacks that are escalating all over the Western world.
The Jews particularly are targeted again, but there is a larger social and political threat that we have to navigate in the next while. We thought that November 3rd would have been enough. Election is an election, but there is a threat to the very idea of democracy. Democracy dies in darkness sometimes, and unless people in America wake up to this extremism that is primarily in the right, extreme right wing.
Well, they think they've had the election stolen from them, so
yeah,
I guess you would expect them to be angry. 75 million Americans believe that the election was stolen.
The facts, though, show an indication of exactly the opposite. The glorious election was held where 81 million people voted for the winner, and it was the cleanest, most transparent election, and repeated.
Well, do you agree?
Decertify.
Absolutely not. And Asher and I have discussed this before. Yeah. Increasing number of states are having forensic audits, and the results that are coming up are very troubling. And not only was it not the cleanest election, it was, I realize, because Asher supports the current administration, and we've discussed it before, that when what's coming out comes out, it will be as shocking for Asher and people who think like him as it was shocking for Jewish communists when Stalin's crimes were established.
To confront the reality.
I don't know if, and I'm not happy to say that when Stalin's crimes were revealed in 1956 at the Soviet Party Communist Party Conference in Moscow. It was exactly, I realized what Asher's hearing, and these stories repeated. It was clean, it was this, it was that. It was exactly the opposite. The worst part is, for the bad guys who did it, is the good guys were tracking all of this. They got it all from the National Security Agency and the new Space Force. They've got everything. That's why Dr. Fauci is on the way out now, because his emails are being exposed that he lied and he lied and he lied. No, the masks are no good. No, it's not from the market. Yes, it's from Wuhan. No, there's no, yes, hydroxychloroquine. He's gotten caught. That's why Barnes and Nobles and Amazon will not carry his book now. All the lies he told, and if you question that, you were deplatformed and told you conspiracy theorists. It's all being shown exactly the opposite of what Fauci said, and he's on his way out real fast. Now, we have a similar situation with the elections where forensic audits are underway, very serious ones. In Arizona, in Georgia, a group team just went down from Pennsylvania. And
Lowell, you say it's serious, but there is nothing there. It's
there's everything there. They're already finding, the documentation is coming out, and you will see, if it even takes to Rosh Hashanah, that the election will be decertified state by state, which then creates a constitutional crisis where the military has to come in. I know the papers that I know where you're getting this from, and I know what they put out, Shachrit, Minch, and Mari, which is why when the cloud of lies is dispersed, it's going to be very shocking for people in the Jewish community who supported Mr. Biden. Unfortunately,
Again, I'm a Republican. Keep in mind, I'm a Republican liberal.
Whatever you call yourself, it's not an issue of party affiliation. It's an issue
Right,
of,
it's not.
is today
it's not.
Thursday. It's going to be very shocking for people who, and also for the media that covered up for the lying and the stealing, the stopping of the vote count, the bringing in the illegal ballots. I'm happy to say that the good guys, from my perspective, let it happen. Let Biden get in there so that when it comes time to get him out, most of the country will realize there'll always be 10 or 15% of the people who say Stalin is the son of all nations and Khrushchev was a liar and it never happened. And actually we invaded Poland to save the Poles. There will always people, no matter what the facts may be, will say that. I don't believe Asher is one of them. And it's coming out now day by day.
Well,
So, but the issue of extremism and attacks, Deborah, what is her name? Professor Deborah Lipstadt wrote in Hadassah magazine already a year and a half ago and said, girls, ladies, we're nice liberal Jews, whatever liberal means, and we'll say the right. It said, girls, where our danger really is coming from the left. Then the question, what does that mean, the left? That's where in discussion of with communist, socialists, whatever it is, how does Jew hatred or anti-Israel hatred fit into their theological philosophy? That's where, as Asher, what do people believe and to what extent will they act on the belief? We started to discuss this in the monthly seminar, which began on Tuesday, 2 days ago, which I'm giving because I was accepted to that doctoral. I couldn't handle it because I'm on the autistic spectrum. I was formally diagnosed with high functioning autism, Asperger's profile in June 2015, after a year-long evaluation process at the Keshet Institute at Tel Hashomer Hospital. I now understand people think people on the autistic spectrum don't have feelings. It's exactly the opposite. We don't have filters. We have much more feelings. And when I was going to go into this Holocaust studies program, I couldn't handle the subject matter because I couldn't make an emotional firewall. So even though I was accepted with Reverend Dr. Franklin Littell, Methodist minister, wrote a book called The Crucifixion of the Jews, Temple University, fall 1980, said, I can't do this. But now, 40 years later, first of all, now that I have a support network, I know how to create firewalls better. And also because of the urgency of the situation, I realized you can't keep what you know to yourself. So I started the monthly seminar. I'm not dealing primarily with Jew hatred from the left, whatever that means, and the ideological basis for Soviet, Trotskyite, socialist. It comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes. I'm dealing mainly with the Christian churches now. And I will be dealing with the new Nazis, which is the old paganism. I mean, well, there were root races from Atlantis and the Lemurians and the 12 tribes of a satanic root race. And then when we have the Ariosophists from Madame Blavatsky, where you just have to be turned into soap and lampshades, or the soft version of the anthroposophist of Rudolf Steiner was, well, you can exist as an individual, but you can't exist as a people, and you don't have a land. This is the core for all of these groups, left or right. You're not a people, and you don't have a right to sovereignty in the land of Israel. And there you get into the blasphemy, because this is basically giving the finger to God, because God is saying, I'm God, I created all of you, I chose this people, I gave them this land, I gave them the Torah, and you have to accept that they've come back, and more of them will come back. And you have to believe in me and follow my Noahide laws. And if you don't, I'll drop some fire and brimstone on you like Sodom and Gomorrah. and say, oh, well, I don't believe that. Okay, you come down to a battle of the gods, little g, with God with a big G, as you said, the creator. I heard what you said. It's a battle, it's a Gotterdammerung, it's the battle of the gods. And well, they say, okay, it's fine. Our gods are stronger than your God. That's what 850 priests, 400 of Baal and 450 of Astarte said to Elijah in Mount Carmel. Okay, let's go. Now, if Elijah had lost, they would have killed him. But they lost, so Elijah said, take them down to the brook, let not one escape, and he killed them. Why? Not just because they had wrong concepts. They were involved in breaking all the laws. They had wrong concepts. They worshiped demons and fallen angels, and they were in rebellion. They murdered, steal, murder, theft, rape, child human sacrifice, all breaking orgies. Let's look at the basic laws in terms of sexual morality. What does the Torah say? You don't have sex with your father, your mother, your sister, your brother, your son, your daughter, your grandfather, your grandmother, your grandchildren. People did and do all those things. There's two reasons you don't do it. One, it causes chaos in social relations, and two, genetically screws up all you don't do that. There's a reason on both levels. You don't do it. You don't have sex with animals. Well, I love my donkey. I love my monkey. What's the matter? You have something making monkey? People do all these things, and they did all those things. No, you don't have sex in graveyards with dead bodies, like in certain forms of tantric Buddhism. So you really come along at a critical. We have to have more conversations because you're dealing with deep philosophical issues, which the average person, even the so-called educated intellectual person, is not used to thinking about. Because now I'm listening to you say, what does she really say? She's dealing with all the big questions. Most people can't handle the big questions. That you are doing that. Do you have anyone in intellectual circles in England, as bankrupt as they may be, who will say, you know what, Miss Khaw is right, or professor, doctor, I don't know what your
They
credentials are,
prefer to think I'm mad.
That's the way they handle it. She's
Or they
crazy.
pretend I don't exist. The mainstream media are not interested in discussing any of these issues. And mainstream media, the fourth estate is now the first estate. They control our perception of ourselves, of our nation, of our history, and how we should behave towards each other. The fourth estate is now the first estate. The fourth estate follows no rules.
Well, for myself, and I've discussed this with Asher, and that's my background from the media from New York. I don't regard mainstream media as media. I regard them as what I would call corporate fascist mouthpieces. And they will say or not say whatever the organization or corporation or government that controls them tells them to say, like Pravda. And if you don't say it, you won't be working there very long. And the kind of people they employ are generally, I'll give you an example. When I was at Reuters, I mentioned to someone on my break in the coffee lounge about Bleichroder being the banker for Bismarck. And this is a reporter at Reuters' second largest bureau outside of London in New York. I have to give him credit for being honest. He said, who's Bismarck? If you're going to be a reporter for Reuters, you have to have a general education. No, Moscow is the capital of Russia. I'll give you another example, a professor with a doctorate in international relations, Jewish, from America, who taught here. I mentioned something about Uzbekistan, and to give him credit for his honesty, he said, where's that? Now, there you're dealing with a total educational collapse. In the old days, a person who had to know certain basic, you had to know Aristotle and Plato or Greek philosophers if you didn't read them. You're dealing with someone at Reuters said, who's Bismarck? And a professor of international relations says, where is Uzbekistan? It's the largest nation in Central Asia. You don't have to know that the defense minister...
Well, ever-lowering standards of education will be the consequence of sexual immorality, because sexual immorality means unmarried parents and children they don't look after very well, and entering the education system and not being able to keep up, and standards of education falling, lowering to accommodate these people who can't keep up.
This is a
The
real
dilution
problem.
of educational standards, which cannot be discussed either.
Right. There also may be issues that we should talk about another time in terms of going back 150 years with British thinkers, the Fabian socialists, Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, different genetic levels of people, the worker people. You go back to Plato's The Cave, which the Plato's Republic, where you have the aristocratic class, the warrior class, your intelligence, police, and military, muscle men who keep, and then the slave class who is not supposed to know anything. That's why the Nazis in their plan for the East, in addition to murdering 80% of the Slavs were meant to be slaves, the ones who were left. They didn't need an education to read and write because they're just supposed to be slaves. And there may be elements of the British ruling classes who have adopted that philosophy that those we don't exterminate through various ways. Well, these are our slave classes. We use them when we're bored for peasant hunting.
They have no representation because the people who are supposed to represent them are, well, they're part of the system that exploits them.
This is a big problem. And this is why universal Jewish teachings are very threatening to them. There's a God with a moral law. No, I'm the God and I'll make the laws. This goes right back to Nimrod and Abraham. So what they want, dumbed down populations, spread the drugs, destroy the families,
and blame the Jews, and blame the Jews.
And always blame the Jews. And also to put Jews in positions of apparent but not real power and say, the Jews did it to you. This is happening now with the Anglo-American oil and banking establishment in England and America. You put Jews in positions of apparent. What's real power? Real power is I control the land or resources like coal, oil, gas. Apparent power is the media, movies, the universities. But real power, as in POWER, muscle, is I control the land or I control the industries. And the great families that control them or control them through the corporations they own as major shareholders always put Jews in positions of apparent power, but not real power. So when things fall apart, the Jews did it, not us. Every time, everywhere in Weimar, Germany, you put the Poles with their estates in the Ukraine before the Khmelnytsky massacres had Jews as running the estates. Then they oppressed the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians were also the Polish Catholics, Ukrainian Orthodox. They're different religious groups. So when they finally revolted, they said, it's not just the Poles who are oppressing us, but those Christ killers, they're oppressing us. It didn't take much to get them to go after the local Jewish communities. And away they went. So always the Jew is set up.
And I think,
please.
I'm sorry, I suppose it's so important to understand that the corruption of the post-Christian Westerner is really the consequence of disbelief in any supreme authority.
Right.
And can you imagine, all these nihilists competing with each other for status and resources and sex partners?
Right.
The
Claire?
way they're going to compete with them will be, well, unethical, to say the least.
To say the least. Claire, we're going to have to conclude the program now. Our first, I hope we can have, I have to think how to format it, because what you're really talking about is moral philosophy. What you're talking about is an area that's very difficult for most people to talk about, including my son. You're getting my brain going again, because you're dealing with ethics and moral philosophy. We should have to have some more discussions, but I'll have to conclude the program now. So what I'd like to ask is if you could make a concluding statement, and Asher, and then I'll give my, well, we thank you like at the beginning.
Thank
so
you.
Would you please both say something, and then we conclude this first session of
I'm just
reflection.
delighted that we had the opportunity to meet Claire and to really raise not only esoteric, but really existential subjects. It involves our very life and our very existence as humanity. The future of the world literally hangs in the balance. To live and let live, to appreciate our differences. You know, that's where democracy comes in. Not to fear different people, not to fear a change, but to embrace it, to first accept it, then embrace it, and try to together find a way to coexist. Really, I'm optimistic, although from what Arya indicated lately, is yes, he's shaking his head in agreement. We don't have that humanity is more pessimistic, or tends to be more pessimistic than optimistic. I don't believe that there is a linear way to improvement. You know, for every small advance, there may be several reactionary steps. I used to believe, as I mentioned once before, that if you're blessed to live to be 70, and I'm 7 plus 70, you have acquired wisdom.
Asher, I need to conclude the program. I have to ask Claire to make a concluding statement to stop the recording.
I'm not that that I'm not that optimistic, but I'm still hopeful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Claire,
Thank
it's
you.
your turn.
Yes, I'll very quickly say that I think I am optimistic, but only in theory, of course, because there is a belief in Judaism that before the disease, the cure exists. And I think the cure is all around us, and we're just refusing to look at them because of our wrongthink and our refusal to face our fears and do the right thing.
So I want to thank you both very much. We want to thank Claire for being a guest on our show. And I want to thank Asher and Miriam and Les, who had to go earlier, for participating. And we hope we'll have more sessions to discuss and reflect on moral philosophy. Now I want to say good night to all of our viewers and listeners, and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem, Israel.
You're well.
And good night to Claire, or good evening to Claire, and good afternoon to Asher.
Good afternoon to me
in New York, and good evening to Claire in London. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.